Imagine waking up one day and realizing you've been living inside the last chapters of a history book, but nobody told you which chapter you're on. That's kind of what it feels like right now. Because if you zoom out, like really zoom out past the headlines, the memes, the scandals, and you look at entire empires across thousands of years, there's this weird, creepy pattern that shows up over and over again. Not just once, not just with Rome, over and over again. 7 stages, and by the end of this, you're probably going to have the same uncomfortable thought a lot of people do when they see this pattern. Oh, America looks a lot like stage 5. So let's do this. No doomerism for the sake of it. No, the end is near sign. Just a brutally honest walk through how empires rise, peak, rot from the inside, and collapse, using 3 real examples: Rome, the British Empire, and the Soviet Union. And as we go through each stage, I want you to keep asking yourself one little question. Does any of this feel familiar? Because if it does, you're not crazy. All right, so first, why do empires even follow patterns? Shouldn't history be random and chaotic? It is chaotic on the surface, but underneath, humans are still humans. We're still wired for status, fear, comfort, tribe, stories. Stick enough humans together, add power, add time, and they start acting in similar ways. That's why Rome and America, 2 completely different worlds, can still feel strangely alike. Now, here's the simple version of the 7-stage collapse pattern we're going to use. Stage 1, hunger. Stage 2, expansion. Stage 3, peak. Stage 4, overstretch. Stage 5, decadence. Stage 6, paralysis. Stage 7, collapse. We'll unpack each one, and we'll tag Rome, Britain, and the Soviet Union as we go, so this doesn't stay abstract. Then we'll talk about why America screams Stage 5 energy right now. Let's start with Stage 1, hunger. Every empire starts with a chip on its shoulder. Hunger is when a people feel small, threatened, disrespected, or poor, and they decide collectively, we're not staying like this. Early Rome? A scrappy city-state in a rough neighborhood, surrounded by bigger, older powers. They were nobodies compared to the Greek cities or Carthage. They fought, scraped, and obsessed over discipline, honor, and survival. The early British? Cold island, not particularly rich, overshadowed by bigger European powers. They weren't born the masters of the seas. They got there by sheer obsession, shipbuilding, trading, colonizing, taking insane risks. The Soviet Union? It was born out of humiliation. The Russian Empire was wrecked by war and poverty. The revolution wasn't some random aesthetic choice. It was a violent reaction to misery. The early Soviets lived in scarcity. The propaganda wasn't "we're rich." It was "we'll suffer now to build something strong later." Stage 1 is always about sacrifice. Long hours, high risk, obsession with work, discipline, and collective identity. People accept pain because they believe in a future. There's a lot of nationalism, a lot of us versus them, but it's directed toward building something. Stage 2, expansion. Once the hunger pays off and the system starts working, the expansion kicks in. Rome starts winning wars. They crush rivals, grab land, resources, and slaves. The machine of conquest becomes self-reinforcing. Victories bring money, money funds armies, armies bring more victories. The British discover that trade plus navy equals ridiculous leverage. Colonies, ports, routes. Suddenly, this random island starts influencing entire continents. They're not just surviving anymore, they're shaping the rules. The Soviets industrialize at insane speed. They go from mostly agrarian to a superpower in a few decades. They expand influence across Eastern Europe, project power abroad, support revolutions globally. They're in a direct competition with the United States for global dominance. Stage 2 feels like we can do anything. If Stage 1 is sacrifice for survival, Stage 2 is sacrifice for greatness. There's still discipline. There's still shared purpose. People will accept rationing, harsh policies, military conscription, because they believe their empire is on an upward path. Stage 3, peak. Stage 3 is when the empire feels like the center of the universe. Rome, at its height, controls the Mediterranean. All roads lead to Rome isn't just a cute phrase, it's a description of how connected everything is to that one hub. Infrastructure, trade, law, culture, it all flows through the capital. The British Empire literally has the line, "The sun never sets on the British Empire." That's peak energy. Financial hubs, colonies, language, culture, law, all over the globe. The Soviet Union hits its peak in terms of military reach and ideological influence. Nukes, space race, superpower status. They're not just one country anymore. They're one pole of a bipolar world. Stage 3 feels incredible from the inside. You grow up assuming your empire is the default setting of the planet. Your culture is normal. Your money is global. Your problems are the world's problems. Everyone learns your language, watches your stuff, follows your rules, or at least reacts to them. But here's the uncomfortable twist. By the time people feel like they're at the absolute top, the seeds of decline are already planted. Which brings us to stage 4, overstretch. Stage 4 is where things quietly begin to go wrong, not in a dramatic movie way, in a "this is fine" meme way. Overstretch is when the empire now has so many obligations, commitments, and moving parts that it becomes hard to maintain them all. Rome has this massive border, multiple fronts, restless provinces, and a growing administrative burden. It needs more taxes, more troops, more bureaucracy. The British Empire is juggling colonies, protectorates, wars, debt, and growing nationalist movements inside the lands they control. Holding it all together costs more than it used to. The Soviets are pouring insane amounts of resources into the military, into controlling satellite states, into keeping the ideology alive not just at home but abroad, while their economic model is already creaking. Overstretch feels like this. From the outside, the empire still looks super powerful. From the inside, the costs are getting heavier, budgets strain, politics get uglier, maintaining the status quo feels more exhausting. You have elites arguing over how to allocate resources, how to keep global commitments going, how to deal with rising internal dissatisfaction. If you're living inside the empire at this stage, you probably sense something's off. Things are more complicated, more tense, but everyday life still works. You can still say, "We're the greatest," with a straight face. And that's exactly when stage 5 creeps in. Stage 5, decadence. This is the one that should make you a little uncomfortable. Decadence isn't just rich people doing weird stuff in palaces. That's the cartoon version. Decadence is when a society turns inward, obsessed with comfort, entertainment, and internal fights, while slowly forgetting the hard, ugly things that built its power in the first place. In Rome, you start seeing this in the late empire. Politics turning into theater, bread, and circuses, people more invested in spectacle than governance. Corruption rises, office becomes a way to get rich, not to serve. The elites argue, the poor are restless, the military is both essential and increasingly detached from the old values. In the British Empire, decadence shows up as this weird mix of arrogance and apathy. Elites are still convinced of their superiority, but the will to endure pain for the empire is fading. There's more focus on lifestyle, class games, social scandal, less appetite for the grind of maintaining a brutal global system. The Soviets? Their version of decadence looks different from the outside, less flashy, more gray, but it's still decadence. The ideology becomes hollow. People say the slogans but don't believe them. Corruption becomes normal. The system becomes about protecting positions and privileges instead of building a future. Cynicism replaces belief. Decadence is when the stories people tell about themselves and the reality they live in drift apart. Now, just pause and think about what decadence looks like today. Massive wealth at the top, people scrolling through endless content while feeling more anxious and empty than ever. Politics turning into reality TV. Everyone screaming at each other online over cultural side quests while infrastructure literally crumbles. If this feels familiar, that's because it is. And here's the key thing about stage 5. It doesn't feel like collapse. It feels like endless present. Noise, distraction, outrage, comfort. Decadence isn't the house burning down. It's everyone arguing in the living room while the foundation quietly rots. We're going to come back to this, because this, right here, is why America looks so much like stage 5. But first, let's finish the pattern. Stage 6, paralysis. At some point, the gap between the story and reality gets too big. The problems that we're building in stages 4 and 5, debt, inequality, corruption, external rivals, angry populations, grow to a level where they demand real decisions. But the system is so divided, so captured by competing interests, that it can't act decisively. In late Rome, emperors come and go, coups, civil wars, power struggles. The machinery still exists. There are laws, titles, ceremonies. But decisions are more about short-term survival than long-term strategy. For the British Empire, this looks like a series of retreats and improvisations. Losing colonies, losing global financial dominance, dealing with 2 world wars, trying to manage decline without admitting its decline. The empire tries to reinvent itself as something else, but the days of effortless command are gone. The Soviets hit paralysis hard in their final years. The economy is stagnant. Reforms are attempted, but every reform risks destabilizing the entire system. Elites are terrified of losing control, but they also know staying the same is impossible. That's paralysis. Damned if you change, damned if you don't. Stage 6 is that moment when a society knows something is wrong, but every path forward is blocked by some powerful interest, fear, or internal conflict. And then finally, stage 7, collapse. Collapse is not always cinematic. It's not always a single day where everything explodes. Sometimes it's gradual. Territories spin off, institutions lose legitimacy, the center stops being the center. Sometimes it's more dramatic, revolutions, coups, economic crashes that break the system. Rome doesn't vanish overnight. It declines, splits, transforms. The western half crumbles, the eastern half limps on as Byzantium. But the thing people once called Rome, the eternal empire, is gone as a unifying reality. The British Empire doesn't explode. It dissolves. Decolonization, crises, a shift from ruler to just another country, even if still influential. The empire is dead, even if the nation lives. The Soviet Union collapses hard. In a few years, a supposed eternal superpower becomes 15 separate countries, the ideology officially abandoned. It's sudden and shocking if you were raised to believe the system was forever. That's the 7-stage pattern. Hunger, expansion, peak, overstretch, decadence, paralysis, collapse. Now, where does America sit in this? Let's be honest, the United States clearly went through hunger and expansion. It had its brutal, messy founding era. It had its go west, industrialize, conquer, dominate phase. It hit its peak after World War II. Massive economy, military, cultural influence everywhere. Stage 3, clear. Stage 4, you can argue the Cold War, global bases, endless foreign commitments, and massive bureaucracies were classic overstretch. But right now, if you look around at the culture, at politics, at the mental state of the population, it doesn't feel like hunger. It doesn't feel like confident peak. It feels like stage 5, decadence. Let's break down the signs. First sign, the attention economy. In every decadent empire, the elite learn that if you keep the population entertained and distracted, you can avoid dealing with deeper problems. Bread and circuses in Rome, imperial pageantry in late Britain, empty parades and hollow slogans in late Soviet times. Today, it's algorithms, infinite content, outrage cycles, entertainment blended with politics until you can't tell which is which. Ask yourself honestly, is the average citizen more focused on the structural issues of debt, infrastructure, education, and long-term strategy? Or on the latest viral controversy, celebrity drama, or culture war micro-scandal? That's not an accident. That's what stage 5 looks like on a screen. Second sign, elite dysfunction. In a healthy, hungry empire, the elites are tough, focused, and somewhat aligned. They argue, but they can still rally around shared survival goals. In stage 5, elites become more interested in playing internal games, status, wealth extraction, factional warfare, than in maintaining the health of the whole system. You see this when political office becomes more about brand building than service, when lobbying and influence buying are just how things work, when the rich aren't even pretending to be part of the same social contract as everyone else. That happened in Rome. Senators buying influence, selling offices, looting provinces. It happened in Britain. Imperial administrators treating colonies as personal enrichment opportunities, not responsibilities. It happened in the Soviet Union, party officials enjoying privileges completely disconnected from the lives of the ordinary citizens they supposedly represented. When your elites are insulated from the consequences of their decisions, you get stage 5. Third sign, loss of shared story. Every strong empire has a story that most of its people genuinely believe in, even if it's flawed. We're building a republic. We bring civilization. We're creating a worker's paradise. We stand for freedom and opportunity. By stage 5, those stories fracture. Some people still cling to the old myth. Others are completely disillusioned. Some invent new narratives. Others retreat into cynicism or pure self-interest. Instead of one big story, you get a war of micro-stories, tribes, and identities. Think about how divided the narrative is now. You can have two people in the same country living in totally different realities, consuming different news, believing the other. Side is not just wrong, but evil. That's classic late-stage behavior. Rome had its own narrative wars between different factions, religions, and visions of what Rome even was. Britain had deep internal fights over what the empire meant, whether it was moral, whether it should even continue. The Soviets had a huge gap between official propaganda and the underground jokes, black market reality, and private conversations people really trusted. Fourth sign, comfort plus anxiety. This is a weird one. In a decadent empire, on average, people are more materially comfortable than at almost any time in their history, while at the same time reporting record levels of stress, anxiety, depression, and meaninglessness. You've got technology, medicine, access to entertainment, climate control, food delivery, and yet people feel more unstable inside. That's because material comfort doesn't fix existential confusion. In fact, it can sometimes make it worse, because the old excuses are gone. Stage 5 is when a society has climbed the mountain of material progress, but hasn't figured out what to actually do with itself. Remember, Rome's citizens in the capital had access to food distributions, public baths, entertainment. The British middle class in the late empire had more comfort than their ancestors. Soviet urban elites had privileges, access, and security compared to earlier generations, and yet all three systems felt more hollow near the end. Fifth sign, the sense that nothing really changes. In decadent periods, you get this vibe that no matter who you vote for, protest against, support, or cancel, the core machinery doesn't move. You'll see big symbolic fights, cultural drama, headlines screaming historic moment, and then, structurally, almost nothing changes. Debt keeps rising, infrastructure keeps aging, trust keeps falling, inequality keeps widening, long-term problems stay unresolved. That's the drift from stage 5 into stage 6, from decadence into paralysis. So, is America already in paralysis or still decadence? Honestly, it's like a foot in both. Culturally, it's full-on stage 5, distraction, spectacle, elite games, meaning crisis. Institutionally, you're seeing more and more hints of stage 6, government shutdowns, inability to pass basic reforms, everything politicized and gridlocked. Now here's the part people always ask. Okay, so if America is in stage 5, does that mean collapse is inevitable? And this is where history is a warning, not a script. Patterns exist, but they don't guarantee future outcomes. Rome could maybe have lasted longer with different choices. The British Empire did collapse as an empire, but reinvented itself as a nation-state. The Soviet Union collapsed, but Russia still exists, in a different form. Empires end. Peoples don't always end with them. The real question isn't, will America exist forever? It won't. Nothing does. The real question is, what comes after stage 5, and who are you going to be inside that process? Because here's the brutally honest truth. Most people in collapsing systems don't notice what's happening until it's too late. Ordinary Romans were still trying to attend games, make money, and live their lives while the empire rotted. British citizens were still chasing careers, gossip, and fashion while the empire shrank. Soviet citizens were still queuing for groceries and making dark jokes right up until the entire structure suddenly wasn't there anymore. Collapse, when it shows up, always feels sudden to the people who weren't paying attention. But nothing is ever truly sudden. The pattern was building for decades. So where does that leave you watching this, living through this? First, it gives you language. You're not just feeling weird about the world, you're noticing a systemic stage. When you see endless outrage online, you can go, right, bread and circuses, stage 5. When you see elites playing games with power instead of solving problems, you can go, yep, late empire behavior. When you feel both materially safe but spiritually restless, you can go, this is what it's like to live in decadence. Second, it forces a hard question. Are you going to live like it's still stage 3, or are you going to prepare like stage 6 is coming? Because if history is any guide, stage 5 doesn't last forever. Decadence leads to paralysis. Paralysis leads to crisis. The crisis forces a choice, renewal or collapse. Renewal means brutally honest reform, usually very painful. usually resisted by those who benefited from decadence. Collapse means the system breaks, often chaotically, sometimes violently. People lose savings, security, identity. Things get real, fast. You don't control that at the macro level. You're not the emperor. But you do control how fragile or resilient you are when the system around you changes. Think about what people who survived these transitions did. In Rome, the ones who adapted were the ones who built local networks, communities, practical skills, and didn't cling too hard to the fantasy that the old order was eternal. In the British case, people who realized the empire is fading, the world is shifting, and repositioned themselves economically and psychologically did better than those who lived in denial. In the Soviet collapse, the individuals and families who had even a tiny bit of savings in something real, or skills that worked outside the official system, or connections they could rely on, were less crushed by the shock. So when we say America looks like stage 5, we're not saying panic. We're saying, stop pretending you're living in stage 3. Stop assuming the institutions will always function. Stop assuming money will always work the same way. Stop assuming your culture will always be dominant. Stop assuming the story you grew up with will map cleanly onto the next 50 years. Stage 5 is a warning label. It says, you're comfortable, you're distracted, your elites are playing games, your institutions are aging. You have a shrinking window to get your own house in order before the big test. And here's the twist most people miss. Stage 5 can be bizarrely empowering if you're awake. While everyone else is hypnotized by the circus, you can be that weird minority quietly building resilience, learning real skills, forming real relationships, and thinking long-term in a short-term culture. While others are clinging to micro-identities and outrage cycles, you can be asking bigger questions. What kind of person do I want to be when comfort isn't guaranteed? What do I actually stand for when the empire's story stops making sense? Who can I rely on if the system fails me? Those are stage 6 and 7 questions, asked early, in stage 5, while you still have time and resources to act on them. And if enough people in a society start asking those questions and acting on them, sometimes, you don't get a clean theatrical collapse. Sometimes you get a messy, painful, but real renewal. Will America pull that off? I don't know. History doesn't give guarantees. But history does give you this, a pattern that says you are not crazy for feeling like something is off. You are not crazy for sensing that your society is rich, loud, powerful, and weirdly hollow. You're just living in a late-stage empire. Hunger built it, expansion spread it, peak glamorized it, overstretch weakened it, decadence numbed it, paralysis will test it, collapse or renewal will define what comes next. The pattern is there. The only real question left is, now that you see it, what are you going to do about it?